The Church Fathers, early Church Fathers, Christian Fathers, or Fathers of the Church are ancient and generally influential Christian theologians, some of whom were eminent teachers and great bishops. The term is used of writers or teachers of the Church not necessarily ordained and not necessarily saints. Origen, Adamantius and Tertullian are often considered Church Fathers but are not saints owing to their views later deemed heretical, although most are honored as saints in the Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox, Anglican, Lutheran churches, and other churches and groups. By 700 AD, all of these church fathers had died, while Western churches regard only early teachers of Christianity as fathers. The Orthodox Church honors as fathers many saints far beyond the early centuries of church history, even to the present day. Great fathers. In each of Western and Eastern Christianity, 4 fathers are called the Great Church Fathers, as follows. Western Church: Ambrose, Jerome, Augustine and Saint Gregory the Great. Eastern Church: Basil, Athanasius, Gregory of Nazianzus and John Chrysostom. In the Roman Catholic Church, they are also called the 8 Doctors of the Church. Apostolic Fathers. The earliest Church Fathers are usually called the Apostolic Fathers since tradition describes them as having been taught by the 12. Important Apostolic Fathers include Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch and Polycarp of Smyrna. In addition, the Didache and Shepherd of Hermas are usually placed among the writings of the Apostolic Fathers although their authors are unknown, like the works of Clement, Ignatius and Polycarp. They were first written in Koine Greek. Clement of Rome in his epistle, 1 Clement, was copied and widely read in the early church. Clement calls on the Christians of Corinth to maintain harmony and order. It is the earliest Christian epistle aside from the New Testament. Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius of Antioch was the 3rd bishop or patriarch of Antioch and a student of the Apostle John. En route to his martyrdom in Rome, Ignatius wrote a series of letters which have been preserved. Important topics addressed in these letters include ecclesiology, the sacraments, the role of bishops, and the incarnation of Christ. He is the second after Clement to mention Paul's epistles. Polycarp of Smyrna. Polycarp of Smyrna was a Christian bishop of Smyrna. It is recorded that he had been a disciple of John. The options for this John are John, the son of Zebedee, traditionally viewed as the author of the Gospel of John, or John the Presbyter. Traditional advocates follow Eusebius in insisting that the apostolic connection of Polycarp was with John the Evangelist, and that he was the author of the Gospel of John, and thus the Apostle John. Polycarp tried and failed to persuade Pope Anicetus to have the West celebrate Passover on 14 Nisan, as in the East. Around 155, the Smyrnans demanded Polycarp's execution as a Christian, and he died a martyr. The story of his martyrdom describes how the fire built around him would not burn him, and that when he was stabbed to death, so much blood issued from his body that it quenched the flames around him. Polycarp is recognized as a saint in both the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Greek Fathers. Those who wrote in Greek are called the Greek Fathers. Famous Greek Fathers include Clement of Rome, Irenaeus of Lyons, Clement of Alexandria, Athanasius of Alexandria, John Chrysostom, Cyril of Alexandria, the Cappadocian Fathers, Maximus the Confessor, and John of Damascus. Irenaeus of Lyons. Irenaeus was bishop of Lugdunum in Gaul, which is now Lyon, France. His writings were formative in the early development of Christian theology, and he is recognized as a saint by both the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church. He was a notable early Christian apologist. He was also a disciple of Polycarp. His best-known book, Against Heresies, enumerated heresies and attacked them. Irenaeus wrote that the only way for Christians to retain unity was to humbly accept one doctrinal authority, episcopal councils. Irenaeus proposed that the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke and John all be accepted as canonical. Clement of Alexandria was the first member of the Church of Alexandria to be more than a name, and one of its most distinguished teachers. He united Greek philosophical traditions with Christian doctrine and valued gnosis, that with communion for all people could be held by common Christians. He developed a Christian Platonism. Like Origen, he arose from catechetical school of Alexandria and was well versed in pagan literature. Origen of Alexandria, Origen Adamantius, was a scholar and theologian. According to tradition, he was an Egyptian who taught in Alexandria, reviving the catechetical school where Clement had taught. The Patriarch of Alexandria at first supported Origen but later expelled him for being ordained without the Patriarch's permission. He relocated to Caesarea Maritima and died there after being tortured during a persecution. Using his knowledge of Hebrew, he produced a corrected Septuagint. He wrote commentaries on all the books of the Bible. In Periarchon, he articulated the first philosophical exposition of Christian doctrine. He interpreted scripture allegorically and showed himself to be a Stoic, a Neo-Pythagorean, and a Platonist. Like Plotinus, he wrote that the soul passes through successive stages before incarnation as a human and after death, eventually reaching God. He imagined even demons being reunited with God. For Origen, God was not Yahweh but the first principle, and Christ, the Logos, was subordinate to him. His views of a hierarchical structure in the Trinity, the temporality of matter, the fabulous pre-existence of souls, and the monstrous restoration which follows from it, were declared anathema in the 6th century. Because of his heretical views, Origen is technically not a church father by many definitions of that term, but instead may simply be referred to as an ecclesiastical writer. Athanasius of Alexandria was a theologian, Pope of Alexandria, and a noted Egyptian leader of the 4th century. He is remembered for his role in the conflict with Arianism and for his affirmation of the Trinity. At the First Council of Nicaea, Athanasius argued against the Arian doctrine that Christ is of a distinct substance from the Father. Cappadocian Fathers. The Cappadocians promoted early Christian theology and are highly respected in both Western and Eastern churches as saints. They were a 4th century monastic family, led by Saint Macrina the Younger to provide a central place for her brothers to study and meditate, and also to provide a peaceful shelter for their mother. Abbess Macrina fostered the education and development of 3 men who collectively became designated the Cappadocian Fathers. Basil the Great, who was the second oldest of Macrina's brothers and became a bishop, Gregory of Nyssa, who also became a bishop of the diocese, associated thereafter with his name, and Peter of Sebasta, who was the youngest brother and became bishop of Sebasta. These scholars, along with a close friend, Gregory Nazianzus, set out to demonstrate that Christians could hold their own in conversations with learned Greek-speaking intellectuals. They argued that Christian faith, while it was against many of the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, it was an almost scientific and distinctive movement with the healing of the soul of man and his union with God at its center. They made major contributions to the definition of the Trinity finalized at the First Council of Constantinople in 381 and the final version of the Nicene Creed. Subsequent to the First Council of Nicaea, Arianism did not simply disappear. The semi-Arians taught that the Son is of like substance with the Father, as against the outright Arians who taught that the Son was unlike the Father. So the Son was held to be like the Father, but not of the same essence as the Father. The Cappadocians worked to bring these semi-Arians back to the orthodox cause. In their writings they made extensive use of the formula, 3 substances in one essence, and thus explicitly acknowledged a distinction between the Father and the Son, but at the same time insisting on their essential unity. John Chrysostom, Archbishop of Constantinople, is known for his eloquence in preaching and public speaking, his denunciation of abusive authority by both ecclesiastical and political leaders, recorded sermons and writings making him the most prolific of the Eastern Fathers, and his ascetic sensibilities. After his death he was given the Greek epithet Chrysostomos, meaning golden-mouthed, rendered in English as Chrysostom. Chrysostom is known within Christianity chiefly as a preacher and theologian. Particularly in the Eastern Orthodox Church, he is the patron saint of orators in the Roman Catholic Church. Chrysostom is also noted for 8 of his sermons that played a considerable part in the history of Christian antisemitism, which were extensively cited by the Nazis in their ideological campaign against the Jews. Cyril wrote extensively and was a leading protagonist in the Christological controversies of the late 4th and early 5th centuries. He was a central figure in the First Council of Ephesus in 431, which led to the deposition of Nestorius as Archbishop of Constantinople. Cyril's reputation within the Christian world has resulted in his titles, Pillar of Faith, and Seal of all the Fathers. Maximus the Confessor was a Christian monk, theologian, and scholar. In his early life, he was a civil servant and an aide to the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. However, he gave up to this life in the political sphere to enter into the monastic life. After moving to Carthage, Maximus studied several Neoplatonist writers and became a prominent author. When one of his friends began espousing the Christological position known as monotheletism, Maximus was drawn into the controversy, in which he supported the Chalcedonian position that Jesus had both a human and a divine will. Maximus is venerated in both Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity. His Christological positions eventually resulted in his torture and exile, soon after which he died. However, his theology was vindicated by the Third Council of Constantinople, and he was venerated as a saint soon after his death. His feast day is celebrated twice during the year, on the 21st of January and on the 13th of August. His title of confessor means that he suffered for the faith, but not to the point of death, and thus is distinguished from a martyr. His Life of the Virgin is thought to be the earliest complete biography of Mary, the mother of Jesus. John of Damascus. Saint John of Damascus, Latin, Iohannes Damascenus, also known as John Damascene, Chi-Rho Upsilon Sigma Omicron Rho Omicron Alpha Sigma, Chrysaroas, streaming with gold, i.e., the Golden Speaker, was a Syrian Christian monk and priest. Born and raised in Damascus, he died at his monastery, Mar Saba, near Jerusalem. A polymath whose fields of interest and contribution included law, theology, philosophy, and music. Before being ordained, he served as a chief administrator to the Muslim Caliph of Damascus, wrote works expounding the Christian faith, and composed hymns which are still in use in Eastern Christian monasteries. The Catholic Church regards him as a Doctor of the Church, often referred to as the Doctor of the Assumption because of his writings on the Assumption of Mary. Latin Fathers. Those fathers who wrote in Latin are called the Latin Fathers. Tertullian. Quintus Septimius Florence Tertullianus, who was converted to Christianity before 197, was a prolific writer of apologetic, theological, controversial and ascetic works. He was born in Carthage, the son of a Roman centurion. Tertullian denounced Christian doctrines he considered heretical, but later in life adopted Montanism, regarded as heretical by the mainstream church, which prevented his canonization. He wrote 3 books in Greek and was the first great writer of Latin Christianity, thus sometimes known as the Father of the Latin Church. He was evidently a lawyer in Rome. He is said to have introduced the Latin term Trinitas with regard to the divine to the Christian vocabulary, and also probably the formula 3 persons, 1 substance, as the Latin tres personae, una substantia. and also the terms Vetus Testamentum and Novum Testamentum. In his Apologeticus, he was the first Latin author who qualified Christianity as the vera religia, and systematically relegated the classical Roman Empire religion and other accepted cults to the position of mere superstitions. Later in life, Tertullian joined the Montanists, a heretical sect that appealed to his rigorism. He used the early church's symbol for fish, the Greek word for fish being iota chi theta upsilon sigma, which is an acronym for eta sigma omicron sigma chi rho iota sigma tau omicron sigma theta epsilon omicron sigma sigma omega tau eta rho, to explain the meaning of baptism since fish are born in water. He wrote that human beings are like little fish. Cyprian of Carthage. St. Cyprian was Bishop of Carthage and an important early Christian writer. He was born in North Africa, probably at the beginning of the 3rd century, perhaps at Carthage, where he received an excellent classical education. After converting to Christianity, he became a bishop and eventually died a martyr at Carthage. He emphasized the necessity of the unity of Christians with their bishops, and also the authority of the Roman See, which he claimed was the source of priestly unity. Hilary of Poitiers. Hilary of Poitiers was Bishop of Poitiers and is a doctor of the Church. He was sometimes referred to as the Hammer of the Arians, and the Athanasius of the West. His name comes from the Greek word for happy or cheerful. His optional memorial in the Roman Catholic calendar of saints is the 13th of January. In the past, when this date was occupied by the octave day of the Epiphany, his feast day was moved to the 14th of January. Ambrose of Milan. Saint Ambrose was an archbishop of Milan who became one of the most influential ecclesiastical figures of the 4th century. He is counted as one of the 4 original doctors of the Church. He offered a new perspective on the theory of atonement. Pope Damasus I. Pope Damasus I was active in defending the Catholic Church against the threat of schisms. In 2 Roman synods he condemned the heresies of Apollinarianism and Macedonianism, and sent legates to the First Council of Constantinople that was convoked in 381 to address these heresies. He also wrote in defense of the Roman See's authority, and inaugurated use of Latin in the Mass, instead of the Koine Greek that was still being used throughout the Church in the West in the liturgy. Jerome of Stridonium. Jerome is best known as the translator of the Bible from Greek and Hebrew into Latin. He also was a Christian apologist. Jerome's edition of the Bible, the Vulgate, is still an important text of Catholicism. He is recognized by the Roman Catholic Church as a Doctor of the Church. Augustine of Hippo. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo, was a philosopher and theologian. Augustine, a Latin father and doctor of the Church, is one of the most important figures in the development of Western Christianity. Augustine was radically influenced by Platonism. He framed the concepts of original sin and just war as they are understood in the West. When Rome fell and the faith of many Christians was shaken, Augustine wrote The City of God, in which he defended Christianity from pagan critics and developed the concept of the Church as a spiritual city of God, distinct from the material city of man. Augustine's work defined the start of the medieval worldview, an outlook that would later be firmly established by Pope Gregory the Great. Augustine was born in present-day Algeria to a Christian mother, Saint Monica. He was educated in North Africa and resisted his mother's pleas to become Christian. He took a concubine and became a Manichaean. He later converted to Christianity, became a bishop, and opposed heresies, such as Pelagianism. His works, including the Confessions, which is often called the first Western autobiography, are still read around the world. After his work to proclaim the Word of God, he is now regarded as a father saint to many institutions, and some have been named after him. Pope Gregory the Great. Saint Gregory I the Great was pope from the 3rd of September 590 until his death. He is also known as Gregorius Dialogus in Eastern Orthodoxy because of the dialogues he wrote. He was the first of the popes from a monastic background. Gregory is a doctor of the Church and one of the four great Latin fathers of the Church. Of all popes, Gregory I had the most influence on the early medieval Church. Isidore of Seville. Saint Isidore of Seville was Archbishop of Seville for more than 3 decades and is considered, as the historian Montalembert put it in an oft-quoted phrase, le dernier savant du monde ancien. Indeed, all the later medieval history writing of Hispania was based on his histories. At a time of disintegration of classical culture and aristocratic violence and illiteracy, he was involved in the conversion of the royal Visigothic Arians to Catholicism, both assisting his brother Leander of Seville and continuing after his brother's death. He was influential in the inner circle of Sisibut, Visigothic king of Hispania. Like Leander, he played a prominent role in the councils of Toledo and Seville. The Visigothic legislation which resulted from these councils is regarded by modern historians as exercising an important influence on the beginnings of representative government.